Okay, so Lokovic to Kislev coming up in the next few days. I want to do something today, actually, a different style than usual. And that is, I want to learn from the inside a little bit. I want to go through a few parts of the answers the Alter Rebbe gave to the investigators in Petersburg. And I want to go through it from inside. It was recently discovered after it was Shlomo Monshine printed it, and then it's now printed already in Igris, but it's the whole file of the Alter Rebbe has been was discovered by Rabbi Shlomo Monshine put it all together. Alav Hashalom put it all together in a fascinating chibur. But what's very interesting is to see the way the Alter Rebbe looks at the whole, see the Alter Rebbe explaining Chassidus and the Misnagdim to Chassidus and what Chassidus was about, and to see how the Alter Rebbe puts it through. Now, we're not going to go through the whole letter. It's very, very long, as much as I'd like to, but we'll go through a little bit, and we'll read from the inside, which is different than usual, and we will focus on certain parts and go through certain inyanim b'cholos. Now, just to give a little bit of a history of what's going on over here, to understand what this letter is, we have to give a little bit of a history to what's going on over here. Where do you start history from? It's never like this. First of all, history on its own is no point. You need history for context. Where do you start history from? Yeah, without knowing history, you could think that the Matzvah Eretz Yisrael is Shaloi B'Tzedek. So it's hard. You can't define history, but to say you can't define, can't start nowhere. But let's start from a specific set of circumstances that happened, which was right after the Gaon passed away. Passed away Chol HaMoed Sukkos, and that night there was a Simchas Beis HaShe'eva by the Chassidim. Now the Gaon, as much as he made a chayrim and he fought everything, there was somebody in control a little bit to keep things under control to an extent. Even when he was alive, there was people doing things. There's a big difference in things that he allowed and things that people do in his name. But like in always in life, you have people that are bad people. You have people that are, let's say, extremists by nature, and they use an opportunity. They follow they follow the way, whatever, they follow their nature, and they could blame it on the Gaon, they could blame things on the thing. So once this happened, they made the whole tumult as if the Chassidim are danced by the Levaya of the Gaon, and they reinstituted the next day. They reinstituted the chayrim that they had made years beforehand, which is a story of another time which we've discussed briefly once before. But we're going to go through it. Hashem, different time we'll go through it properly to Machlokes in the Alter Rebbe and other Talmidei Maggid about the response to the chayrim. But it's a different subject. We're discussing now over here this. So they reinstituted the chayrim, but they did it. They actually did something a bit sharper, and they took Nakama over specific Chassidim in Vilna. So they added to the chayrim specific things. For example, Remeir Refals. Remeir Refal was a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. He was one of the leaders of the Kehillah of Vilna. He was one of the Shiva Tovei Yair. He was one of the Parnas Hakol. He was called. He was one of the leadership within the community council. Within the Kehillah, he was one of the leadership within the Kehillah, meaning they came with certain rights and certain whatever. They were the official representatives, and they collected the tax and a few different things. He was one of those people, the Chatchila, and he came to Chassidus. Chatchila was in a secret. There's two famous stories of him and the Alter Rebbe. But so his parnasa came from selling wines. So they made the chayrim, you can't drink the wine of the Chassidim. So they hit him by his parnasa. Also, they closed the shul. They found out they had closed the shul a few times, but they found out where there was a secret minyan. They found out where was a secret minyan, and they gave malchus to the person whose house it was. They ransacked another one of the Chassidim's houses. They were mishtoilel, and they were mamish being mazik the Chassidim in a way that wasn't bearable anymore. So the Chassidim complained to the local authorities. to now you're going to write to local authorities that they're being mean, they don't let us open our own minyan. It wasn't enough. Just to give a little bit of a context of the time, because it's going to be negay, you'll see the Alter Rebbe is going to put this into the letter. It's going to be negay to understand. There was Russia, was a country, and there was a country called Poland, Lithuania. There was two different countries. One was Poland, one was Lithuania. The king of Poland was a queen, married, so it was the queen of Poland. I think they called him king at the time, but the queen of, so let's call him the queen of Poland married the king of Lithuania, or Fakert. I think it's the king of Poland. The queen of Poland married the king of Lithuania. And they made it one big country, which eventually merged even more. And there was a whole, it was a strong country called the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And for a bunch of different reasons, the country started to fall apart. And other countries around them began to exploit that. So they conquered all the territory. At some point, Russia puts in a puppet king of their own. The king of Poland is a puppet of Russia, and that falls apart as well. And this is what's going on in this period of time. So whereas you had a kingdom of Poland, so the whole Mezhebush, Badichev, all of this was all part of Poland for hundreds of years. Poland was in a war with. Now, touching Poland, so you had this, you had Russia, you had the Polish-Lithuanian, it's not an empire, but it's a very large shetach of land that takes a whole bunch of Russia today. Belarus, all countries, sit it, and Lithuania and Poland. It's quite a big shetach. Bordering this Polish empire, is Polish Commonwealth, is the Ottoman Empire. And they're fighting a war. The Polish are fighting a war with the Ottomans, which eventually comes into Russia. Okay, I'm getting too much off, but the point I'm trying to address is that in the mid what the Goyim have, the mid 1700s, in Tov Kuf Chof, something just after the Istalkus of the Baal Shem Tov, is when Poland gets divided. When Poland mamish gets it doesn't become ois yet. It still goes on for quite a few years, but it loses its whole power, and Russia really takes responsibility of a large part of Poland. There's a Russian puppet king over there in charge of Poland, or somebody that they put in, and then within Tov Kuf by Tov Kuf Nun Hey, by this period of time, by 1795, Poland ceases to exist. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth ceases to exist, and it's swallowed up by other countries, Poland basically being swallowed up by Russia. So suddenly, now Poland was always good to the Yidden. So there was a lot of Yidden in Poland. Suddenly Russia has under its authority hundreds of thousands of Yidden that they never had in Russia. Russia didn't have millions of Yidden in the country. It's suddenly been absorbed into Russia. So in addition to having Poland, they have a whole massive country now swallowed into their country, plus different demographics. So they're trying to figure out how to deal with all these new types of people coming into the country and all different demographics. How much should they get involved? How should they get involved? I'm trying to explain a little bit the political concept, the background behind when they're complaining to the authorities. They need to explain why get involved over here. Who cares? Who cares? It's not mamash who cares, but this isn't necessarily. So the Chassidim complain about a few things. One of the things they highlight is that the way it worked, there was a tax. The Vad that was in charge of the Eden, the Parnasei HaKol, they were supposed to take a certain tax for communal upkeep and for paying to the government. One of those, and the Kehillah in Vilna were overcharging and keeping a whole bunch of it to themselves. The problem was not only that they were saying, no one was going to tell on them like that, but they were abusing their power. They were taking their power. They gave Malkus to Chassidim in front of the Beis Medrash. They've ruined up somebody's panos, so they ransacked somebody's house. They're closing down the minyan, and the Chassidim have nowhere to daven. They're excommunicating them from everything. They're going. Things are going nuts, and so they write to the government that they're mixing it. Thus, the government gets involved. The government insists that the Misnagdim Alter Rebbes falls to make a machor. They called him to the Torah. They told him the basin is paskening that he has to renounce Chassidus. He said, no way, it's not happening. And so the mamish, they made an issa to buy from him, and it goes on. The redifas go on until the government gets involved and say absolutely not. I'm cutting a long story short, but the government gets involved and they say this has to stop. The Chassidim are allowed to open their own minyan. There was a point where there was new elections bichlal for the Parnasei HaKol, whatever. Getting that background a little bit, we now the Russians are already involved in this sichsuch a little bit. The local governor, he's a fellow. The local governor is a fellow by the name of Lopuchin or something. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce his name. I don't speak Russian, but when I heard it once from a Russian, and it sounded good. It sounded normal. But he has this. He gets a letter from a fellow by the name of Hirsch Ben David. Let me share with you now this chaymer. We're going to learn inside, and here we're going to start learning from the inside. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to see like this. He gets a letter from a fellow by the name of Hirsch Ben David. The letter, I'm not going to read the person's, it's Misnagdim, the Stam, fellows, whatever, Stam thing, but I'm not going to go through quickly, but you'll see over here, it's written on the 8th of May, 1798, which is Dalet Sivan Tov Kuf Nun Ches. If you remember, there's a thing in those days, it was still a 10-day difference between their calendars, their Goyish calendars and our Goyish calendars. But, and I'm not going to read all of it, but he writes this, I want you to know that in an area in Belarusia, in White Russia, in a town of Lyozhna, there's a Rav, his name is Alman Ben Baruch. He takes young people, Perikei oil, whatever, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to help the new system of governance and of thinking, which is in France. Yeah, I'm going to highlight they're looking to follow the French, which is funny because if you think what happens, 10 years later with the Alter Rebbe, but this is how they're trying to make it, trying to package it or whatever. Trying to make them interested in it. He says their main point is to be free and to the emancipation and the whole whatever's happening over that time in France, which leads eventually to Napoleon. They don't do anything else, and while they wait, so they're waiting in order to start living that type of lifestyle. And in the meantime, they're living without any laws, and they eat and they drink and they don't do anything and they just leave each other things and they steal. He says, my children stole from me 10,000 ruble, and every day they go to Zalman Baruch, to the Alter Rebbe, and he says, ever since my children went there, they took my money, they went to him, and I don't know what's going on anymore with my children. I've lost touch with them. Kitzer, so he has a solution for them, for the government. He says, I've got a good idea. The good idea is send them to battle. Either send them to battle or send them to Golus, but somewhere very far, and they could, over there, they can make up whatever their plans are to eventually for Russia. They should just live their own little lives over there. He's very cynical. And he obviously writes this in Russian. You have over the Russian, he's just translating. This is the translation. And he signs his name. Hirsch Ben David. And in Lashon Kodesh. Zvi Hirsch Davidovich. So this Lepuchin takes his letter. 2 days later, by the way, 2 days later, now before we see 2 days later, what's 2 days? This one is written on Dalet Sivan. What's 2 days after Dalet Sivan? Hey Sivan is Vav Sivan. It's the first day of Shavuos. Gets another letter, written dated the first day of Shavuos. It's another letter. This one's complaining about the local authorities. The local authorities, Ganovim, Gazlonim. You see, this guy's trying to get the attention of the he's trying to find a way to get the attention of this Lepuchin. Now, this person doesn't exist. He writes straight away to his contact in Vilna to find out who is this Hirsch Ben David. This Hirsch Ben David doesn't exist, so it's either it's a Yid that's writing on a fake name, he seems the person he writes to the person that this Lepuchin says, I got this letter, he writes the Yiddish of contact by the name of Yaakov something, and he writes him, he says, who is this person? He says, I don't know. So this is probably a forgery. The assumption is it's a forgery. But there's enough, most of it's fake, there's enough suspicion in there to open an investigation. And that's what triggers opening the investigation. This random letter from a fellow that doesn't exist. But he doesn't. He sends this letter or he makes the Tsar aware of it, and the Tsar says, "Okay, so open an investigation, take the Alter Rebbe, and the letter's all documented now. Take the Alter Rebbe, arrest the Alter Rebbe, and look into it." And here, that was all the introduction. It's not something. I just wanted to give a brief overview. Now, I'm sorry. As part of his investigation, as his preliminary investigation, he comes back. This Lepuchin comes back to the Tsar with a basic overview of what Chassidus is. He gets it quite wrong. He gets some things. It's very interesting. His whole outlook on it. I'm not going to get into his outlook on it because we don't have the time for it. If you want to go through this in depth and properly and look into it, these things are all printed. But I really want to go through what the Alter Rebbe goes through. Now, remember, the Alter Rebbe 22 questions. This is in addition to those questions. Those questions, we have the Rosh Dvarim from the interrogations. This is different. Here, the Alter Rebbe writes a little bit of a broader. The Alter Rebbe actually puts a few different questions in together, and the Alter Rebbe writes this over 3 days after the interrogations of the Alter Rebbe are finished. That's when the Alter Rebbe writes this over a period of 3 days. 4 days. Ches, Tes, Yud, and Yud Aleph Cheshvan. The Alter Rebbe is arrested Isru Chag Sukkos. By the time the Alter Rebbe gets to Peterburg, it's a few days later, and then begins the investigation of talking to the Alter Rebbe. And this letter is what the Alter Rebbe writes. And if you recall, there's a whole story about getting this translated correctly. The Alter Rebbe would only talk with an interpreter. Alter Rebbe spoke Russian. The Alter Rebbe would answer the questions with an interpreter. When I'm not one to tell you what the Alter Rebbe was thinking. Those that do would say that that the Alter Rebbe, it gives time to think. But the Alter Rebbe spoke through an interpreter, and the Alter Rebbe wrote this Lashon Kodesh, and there was it wasn't simple to get an interpreter. They had to send it to Vilna, and the Alter Rebbe writes a special thing that after they get it interpreted to Russian, the Alter Rebbe writes, please give it back to me because there's nuance. Small words could be a big change, could be big differences. Alter Rebbe writes at the bottom of this. Anyway, let's look through this because this is important. This is going to give us. We're not going to go through everything, and we're going to go through. It's going to be part 1 of 2, but we're going to go through a little bit what the Alter Rebbe is writing to the Tsar, and he's going to give us that which we call in Russia, in our country, what we call Boga Malitzia, the davening to the Eibishter or serving the Eibishter, Avodas Hashem, Boga is the Eibishter. Indian Zen Echlak Kitzleinu Klal Yehudim L'Shnei Inyanim. Serving the Eibishter, serving the Eibishter is considered is broken into 2 parts. First one is learning. The Alter Rebbe goes through all about learning, and then the Alter Rebbe will jump to the end of this. To get to this, you need to be academic. You need to have a lot of seichel to be able to get. The Alter Rebbe goes through. To read through the whole thing. It's limud the kriya, Tanakh, the Talmud, the Midrashim, the Farshim, the Poskim, and Makatzim the Talmud. So you have to know learning Tanakh, Gemara, Midrashim, Farshim. And also Sakalocha, but also so Talmud and Pasha to be able to explain things. But and on that, in other words, there's no other stuff in all of this, and we have Kamei Sfarim, Shemacham Bechol Debedoir, kids to get to the Bini say this, you have to be academic, you have to have zitzfleish, you have to be able to sit and learn, you have to have the time to sit and learn, you have to have the head for it, you have to have the knowledge for it. Okay. That's number 1. Number 2, what's called Avodas Hashem. He had tefillah. In base he had tefillah. Shakol mi sheyesh lo ma'at das the idea sefer ktsas. Anybody that has a little bit of seichel and knows how to learn even a little bit, who yuchel ispalu karoi v'nochem b'kabbalah sanei. If he's able to daven properly, you don't need to have a large knowledge to be able to focus on davening. To have kavanah. Why? Ki inu mohos tefillah. Ruba kekola. What's davening? Davening is number 1 is mostly the kutim is moedim upsukim etilim. Shal David HaMelech Hoshai Neviim. It's from It's a liquid of Mizraim, Psukim, David HaMelech, Adon Nevi'im, B'chulam, Shvachim, Shal HaBoirich, V'kayim. All of them is praise of the Eibishter, V'rev G'dolosim, V'shalti, V'rev Revavis, Malachim, Shmei, Shemayim, Alyonim, V'chayes, Kulam, V'chotz, V'shoyim, V'chotz, how talking about the Gadlus HaBoirich from Mizmoire Tilim that most people know how to read, almost everybody knows how to read. V'gam al-Oretz Mitochas and et Movadoi, O Mamlech Malachim, V'loyam Melucha, and all these things have layers upon layers upon layers of understanding, but at the basic level, everybody understands what's the basic types words and the basic understanding of Pirish Amilus, anybody can understand. So V'gam, and also Zichrei Chastei HaBoirich, Sho'osei Mona Sho'itziyonim Mitzrayim, remember the B'chal, the Chetz of the Eibush, we talk about Mitzrayim, and therefore, Sh'alki Roilon and the Avos Hashem B'chalev V'nefesh Ma'oid, B'chalev V'nefesh Ma'oid Ma'umke de Liberty. Therefore, it's fitting for us to love the Eibush, to look how much Chetz the Eibush does for us. V'gam, Leir Es Hashem Elokayim Kol Mitzvayis V'Asher Tzivonu. And also the fear of the Eibush. Again, if we would be able to expound on everything over here, I mean, this could be learned for months on end. We're trying to get the basic overview of what the Alter Rebbe is saying over here, of what is Chassidus and where the Misnagdim came from. The Rebbe is trying to explain where the Misnagdim comes from and why there shouldn't be the Misnagdim. But the Misnagdim is misplaced. Not only misplaced and misguided, is also sometimes, as the Alter Rebbe says, sometimes it's malicious, like we'll see soon. So also to fear the Eibishter, okay, last Tov Yosh Ben Elikim Adam, Li is Tov L'Kol B'Chlal, and Pasha to be good to everybody. Okay, it's Roy to do what the Eibishter, to do what Tov Yosh Ben Elikim Adam, but Li is Tov L'Kol B'Chlal, or Befrat, especially to have a Leiv Tov, LaHameitiv Imonu, Ba'Koil Mikol Koil Omegin Aleinu, B'Tzel Knofov. Or Befrat Leiv Tov LaHameitiv Imonu, especially to have a good heart. I'm mixing up with what's going to say later. Especially with to have a good heart. I'm made to go out to the person who's good to us and everything and protects us. In other words, now the Alter Rebbe is explaining that part of davening is to have a feeling for the Eibishter and to appreciate everything the Eibishter does for us. And one of the good things that we have in life is the King that's so good to us. Okay. So some of the Alter Rebbe explained that there's two parts of Avodas Hashem. There's davening and learning. Learning, everybody has to learn something, but everybody has to learn, but learning is limited to academic ability. Davening, which is a feeling, everybody can feel at their level. Everybody understands, everybody can read Tehillim. You don't have to know Aramish to read Tehillim. Everybody can read Tehillim, and everybody can appreciate what they're saying to the best of their level. Okay, now, what's the benefit of davening b'chlal? Tefillah b'kavana kanal hi ezer v'sad la'odam lamed neged yitzrei hara kol hayom. Davening with kavana is a support for the person to stand against his yetzer hara every day. Gam acharat tefillah. If you have a real feeling by davening, even after davening, lekayim, it keeps you inspired and excited, and then you have the ability lekayim kol mitzvah Hashem mitzvah meira v'asei tov kanal. Why? Because you have a remembrance in your mind, in your heart. When you daven properly and you connected to the Eibishter, you felt Gadlus HaBoirich, and you felt how good the Eibishter is. So you feel it's the whole day. Somebody who doesn't daven with kavanah. You can learn a whole day dinim in Gemara and the other svarim. It's possible that he should be Mekayim what he learns. It's possible he won't keep what he learns. And it can even come, not only will you not keep the mitzvahs, it can come that a person could be over in the form. Why? Because it's not a feeling thing, it's an academic thing. An academic thing you could do against what you know is in your best interest. Or you can do against knowing what you know, what you can do against what you know to do. You could act in a way opposite of what you know. But, says the Alter Rebbe, you know what? Even a person learns what he doesn't do any of it. It doesn't make any sense that a person should talk to the Eibush, say, Baruch Ato Hashem, but his heart and his mind, he's thinking about worldly things, whatever comes in davening. It's very long. It's not in English or in Russian in there, or even in Yiddish, in the Shtetl. It's in Lashon Kodesh, and therefore automatically, by nature, if you're not thinking in the language, if you're not speaking in your natural tongue, so it's another trigger to think machshavas is okay. So it's Alter Rebbe that not only do you need to, so there's davening and there's learning. Learning has there's davening and there's learning. The important davening is more open to everybody, is more attainable for everybody. Davening b'kavana is more attainable than iyun b'limud. At least I don't know if it's more attainable. Might be the wrong word for it. Everybody can attain iyun b'limud, but it's lower hanging fruit. And davening b'kavana is very important. Now, why is kavana important? Why is kavana more important than things? Because the kavana, tefillah helps you. We're talking here obviously about working people. And for working people, they can't sit and learn all day. So what's going to help them, bichlal, in their day-to-day life more? Is it going to be the hour learning or the hour davening? Is going to be the hour davening, but kavana is going to keep them passionate their whole day. Now, Alter Rebbe is now going to go through that davening needs to be guided. A person needs to be guided in davening. Davening is not easy. Once you know how to davening is not easy. And it needs support, and it also needs support. So you need guidance from something. That's what Alter Rebbe is going to say over here. Yeah, it needs to be limud b'shchacham v'novel aspel fi l'kol echad ve'echad k'fi daitay perishat tefillah b'kavanos. It needs to be taught. So although the Alter Rebbe says that on the one hand, davening is easier in a way. The learning is more attainable. Passion by davening is more attainable than for a working person. The more attainable than iyun. Than iyun b'limud. However, especially in those days, where people come out, the new barely knew the words of reading. The kids, nevertheless, you still need to be guided. Yeah. Okay. Now, here's Dalnaz, but the Alter Rebbe is going to now. You want to know? You think this is a new thing? That there's two things: davening and there's learning and there's davening, and it's not a new thing. It was always like this. There was two big houses for davening. Number one was the Beis HaKnesses. Number two was the Beis HaMedrash. Beis HaKnesses la'amoinam atzudim miskeim kol hayom. The shul had the 7 o'clock minyan, the 8 o'clock minyan, the 6:30 minyan, and the 6:25 that finishes before it starts. It has the minyanim for the balabatim that are busy all day. The rubam eino yoyde sefer klal. Most of them don't know how to learn. Remember, especially in those days where they didn't even have. Most people didn't. There was also yeshiva that most people went to. Most people, they started working, they were 11, 12 years old. They didn't. By the way, they can't even daven the way I'm suggesting, says the Alter Rebbe. For all of Yiddishkeit, this is the way it's been. Yeah, since Matan Torah, well, I suppose in the Midbar, they were able to daven and learn the whole time, but since we went to Eretz Yisrael after the Meraglim, the Abish said that the Meraglim's way of doing things is not the right way, and we need to go to Eretz Yisrael and work in the land, so it becomes, you need a Beis HaKnesses, and a Beis HaKnesses. These are the people that know how to say the words. Beis HaMedrash was Liyoidei Sefer. Beis HaMedrash was for the people that knew how to learn. They davened over there. Every person based on, again, his ability. It's regardless, we know this from ourselves, regardless of the fact that we're bachrim in yeshiva that could spend all day learning. Nevertheless, every bachar is on his own level. Even those that focus. Yeah, even those that are focusing a whole day on learning and are not running to work. The Sfarim that were written 200 years ago, it's clear over there. It's clear over there, they would even wait 2 hours. They would daven shachar, it would take them 2 hours or more. So the concept of davening for a long time, one of the things that the investigator found in his original thing is that the Chassidim daven longer. So it's interesting that it doesn't take them longer necessarily. He points out that the investigator says it doesn't necessarily take them longer to say the words. Hachana l'tefillah takes longer. So they start at different times. But anyway, the point is, it's not a new thing, learning. Okay, now. Again, we're not learning it so much as the answer to the thing, which is why, okay, but point number 5. Here the Alter Rebbe is going to explain the cause of the Misnagdim to Chassidus. What happened was this: you had every big community had a Beis HaKnesses and a Beis HaMedrash. A small town had one shul. Everybody basically sat and went to work. The Rav was usually quite poor in the small towns. If they had the Rav, he was very poor, but he was the one person that sat and learned the whole day. Everybody else went to work. In the bigger cities, you had two shuls, right? So the Alter Rebbe says. Now, you always had good Rabbanim. But then in Poland started a craze where you had the Rabbanim was am nicht gepasst. Rabbanim without Yiras Shamayim. Bekonu oy sochru harabonus misar ha'ir besach mesoyim. They were wealthy people, or they were married to wealthy people, and they were able to buy. They bought the Rabbanis in a town for. They used to pay for it. They used to bribe the poritz of the town. B'chol ir ve'ir b'chol malchus poil. And if you were the Rav of town, there were certain things that you got. Besides shrara, which corrupt people could want, there was other benefits and being able to collect the tax, whatever. But so there was people that stood up, and they, instead of being a Rav of town, being a passing person, they started bribing their way into becoming the things. The king just ignored it. The ministers, in order just because they wanted money for bribes, the ministers gave a michtov, gave a letter, gave a contract, or not mamash contract, a contract. They would give a contract to the Rav. Okay, the Rav was in charge of everything that was to do with religion. He was even able to pass him dinim ominous. Yeah, the Rav that didn't know nothing for Choshen Mishpat would start passing dinim ominous. They didn't investigate who's the best Rav for town, who's going to pay me some money. It's a good issue for it. So does he care? Not only that, davening. So you didn't have Rishus davening until the Rav came to shul. You're not going to start this. What happens if the Rav was a psanidrige mensch? So he could turn up at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. And they had to. He wasn't just the Rav Mitam. He wasn't just hired Mitam, the authorities. He was hired by the Kehillah. He was hired. He had to be hired by them. They had to accept him as the Rav. Okay, now, Rabbanim are now, these Rabbanim. So until that time, Rabbanim be Yerei Shamayim. So the simple people davened quick, or whatever, davened to the best of their ability. The simple life. The Rabbanim and the other Bnei Aliyah in every town, Asar Batlonim, whoever sat over there in town the whole time, they sat and learned in the base Mendel. They sat the whole day and they davened B'Kavana also. But these Rabbanim, they didn't even know how to open a Gemara. They weren't Yerei Shamayim. They bought their way into becoming Rav over there. So they didn't want to bother davening B'Kavana. Listen to this. In order that they shouldn't be embarrassed by the rest of the town, his chilul hashpul meilas atfila. The davening is not a chiddush of chassidus. Davening with kavana and davening b'ariches and davening b'mesinas is not a chiddush of chassidus. These rabbonim, because they were academic, perhaps some of them, at least, if you bribed your way becoming a Rav, you didn't have no Yiras Shamayim, and you didn't have no and whatever. But you some of them you had to learn, but some of them didn't know how to learn. Some of them did, but they didn't have Yiras Shamayim. So they started to bring down the mile of davening. What they would do is even more. They would be mile the learning of Gemara even at the time of davening. I want to mention somebody who was trying to explain to me the gadlus of a certain Rosh Yeshiva. I'm embarrassed to say it. He was trying to explain to the gadlus of a certain Rosh Yeshiva, and without thinking that there's anything weird about it, he told me he was able to in middle of Shemona Esrei go and look in a toisus. It's like go to the shop and take out a toisus. It's like go whatever. So you had these people now. Again, they're trying to become better than everybody else. In order to become better than everybody else, they have to have something that nobody else has. So davening, everybody can daven. Over here, they would start. They didn't have Yiras Shamayim. For davening, you need Yiras Shamayim. You need to care about davening. For learning, academic is geshmak if you like academia. But like this anyway. So during the time of davening, they started to promote learning. Therefore, they would start davening very quickly without kavana. And they would take the talmidim. They would begin to learn. So they bribe their way into becoming rabbanim. They don't have Yiras Shamayim. If they don't have Yiras Shamayim, they're not interested in davening. They just want to learn. So they're happy to learn and show themselves off, at least. Those that are able to do that. They're happy to learn and show themselves off. So they go and they promote learning. That's what they're good at. So they'll promote what they're good at. stop promoting learning. Now, if the Rav does that, and the Rav has Talmidim, and there's people that are listening to him, and he's shown his worthiness of being a Gon and a Chorif and Tingen from the whole world, they're writing to him letters. So so they also started davening quickly, B'li Kavana, Machmas Yirasam, either they were scared of him, or they're flattering the Rav. He was in charge, he could do whatever he wanted. So you want to be close to the people that have power. The Rav has the power. Either you're scared of him, or you want to be on his side. So that's it. If the Rav says that learning is the most important, and davening, forget it. Even davening, hold the sefer under your siddur, and keep looking in the sefer during davening. That's what they started to do. So what you ended up happening was like mixes yichidei skula b'chol doirei mispalim b'arichas b'kavana. So you end up having a situation where only limited amount of people would daven b'arichas b'kavana, v'yirukram b'shem chassidim yimei olam, and they were always called chassidim. Yeah, the Vilna Gaon was called the chassid, right? Because he was a person with Yerushalayim with daven for many hours a day. So you have over here, okay, now had shehoya chesed Hashem aleinu. Until came the chesed Eibushanas, the here is ruach malchus hakesaris. They are separate this to the Zar, right? So until there was chesed Eibusher, and what happened at the time, if you remember, I told you right at the beginning that suddenly Poland comes under Russia, and suddenly Eibusher makes that the kingdom of Russia, of the king, Limshal is Poland. And even before the last king was already over there, they started to go down from their thing. Anyway. So suddenly, already by that point, once Russia already was running a puppet government in Poland, that you already had the stoppage of this bribing your way into becoming Rabbonim. But especially now, that these are talking about very, very recent from when the Alter Rebbes wrote the letter, until it was mamash divided, and then suddenly now this whole memsheles harabbonim, this whole system of the Rabbonim, it fell apart. Especially now over here in White Russia and Belarusia, the Russian authorities said absolutely not. They forbade it from then on. Suddenly, everybody is free. Until now, you had to listen to the Rav. The Rav was like a government minister, like a government person, government representative. He was in charge of the Yidden. You always have to listen to the Rav. Mit Tamol, you don't have to listen to the Rav anymore. Everybody's free. You see, so the Rabbanim did was two things. You see what the Alter Rebbes said before? Two things. Number one is, they were mavazda the concept of tefillah. They were mavatal the concept of tefillah. They pushed it aside. They said learning is the most important thing. That triggered not only a different way of thinking, it also triggered people that weren't necessarily shaykh to learning, but were shaykh to davening, to be mischanef to the Rav, or to Fidr or whatever. It made set out the system in the kehillah in that type of way, where learning, where davening became unimportant. Not where learning became, you could put it in one way, built up learning. It wasn't built up learning, it was being mevazah the davening, says the Alter Rebbes. So that, right, to put it down. Suddenly everybody's able to be ma'arich b'tefillah kirtzoyne. Bein yochid, bein rabbim, bein samedesh, bein mokim achir, bein mechab dinasinu. No one's going to tell him off. The Rav can't tell off. There is no such thing as a Rav in charge of your life. Everybody needs a Rav. Some of the Alter Rebbes talking about it. The Alter Rebbes saying, where's the source of the Misnagdim now? So is man korev kanal. This recent phenomenon, it's recent. So when Tadav B'Kavan, you're talking here, starting after the Stalkers of the Baal Shem Tov. One of the reasons why Chassidus was able to spread so much is suddenly it all becomes one big country and things get all over the place. So in some places, this is Oirus to Davin you have from youngsters less than 25 years old. Because youngsters at that age, they're just recently married, and they're still supported by the parents, some of them. They've got no worries. Yeah, many of them, till the Alter Rebbes says, what, 2 children, right? In Uchsam Torah, they're bechlal, they're learning, and they're very far removed from Olam Hazeh. So even there, you have 25-year-olds, 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds that are davening barichas. Aval as Canaan, the older people, older people, because they're so worried about work. It's hard to daven. They said, you have some weekdays where people don't work, and Shabbos and Yom Tov they're able to do that. But the original, the other youngsters, when they daven b'kavonim. So here, one of the things that the person complained about was the movements. The Chassidim make funny moves when they daven. They were trying to portray, like I told at the beginning, they were trying to portray it. He wasn't sure. The Misnagdim were portraying it as some sort of cult, some sort of breakaway religious cult. And one of the things he says is how they daven. And the Alter Rebbes says what happens when a person is very, very passionate. So a person makes movements with his body, with his hands. There's nothing you can do, but you can't control yourself. You're passionate. You're in a state of passion. What are you supposed to do? So because of these tnuas, even it makes us anoshim seineno. Some people say it's not the tnuas that put them off. It's the enemies, the people. They say look at this new thing. Everybody knows it's already. There's always items from David Kavana. It says in Nehemiah, this concept of using hand motions, which by the way is discouraged in Chassidus, in Chabad, since the Middle Rebbe, and then even more by the Rebbe Rashab, is but over here the Alter Rebbe is talking about this anyway. And by the way, if it was a new thing, then everybody would do the same actions. Like you have these people today that make these funny movements with their bodies to help them concentrate, whatever it's called. Says Alter Rebbe, everybody would do the same actions. And of us, you could see it's passion, you can see it's excitement. Okay, now you have, I'm just gonna like this. So you have continued. Okay, so the Alter Rebbe is still continuing. I'm not going to. We'll go through this also because you'll see them in a minute. You should know in all the religions. In every religion, you can have different levels of keeping religion. Different levels of it. Even though we don't have to listen to the Rabbanim that are being to tell us davening is not important, a lot of people, there are those that can daven b'kavana. They don't want to because they're lazy. Now, this is where it's important to understand history. That's what I was telling you before history. Where do you start history from? It's important to know that the concept of davening was always a given. You must daven b'kavana. It's been a given, we make head. But we understood that there were people that are not able to because they have to go work. There came Anshim Lial, there came people that were bad people. They bribed their way to becoming Rabbanim. They didn't want to daven because they didn't have Yiras Shamayim. So they were Mavazir. They said, you know what, actually, what we've known since davening started, what we've known, that's not true. It's not true. You don't need to daven b'kavanah. Learning is much, much, much more important than davening b'kavanah. That's it. If you have a choice, learning or davening b'kavanah, learning is much more important. Now, what that does is, even that creates the opening. And there's always different levels of frumkeit in everywhere. So that creates an opening. So now you also, not everybody is corrupted. But you also have a lot of people, because suddenly it's a concept. It's like, you're from those that hold. They don't really hold it. They hold it because they bribed. But for those hold, so they have some people there are people, they could daven b'kavanah, but for beginning reitzim, why don't they want to machmas atzos? Because they're lazy. Davening is very, very hard. To feel, we know this from our own davening. Davening is harder than learning. Once you know how to teach an Omid Gemara, or once you know how to learn a Maimach Chassidus a little bit, or once you know whatever, once you found your mokim, your place in learning, and you know what you want to be kaver in learning, and you know what your head wants you to learn today, so what your middle of today, we know that that davening, to feel by davening, is much, much harder. Number one. So although it's more accessible, it's very important. So although it's more accessible, it's much harder. Now, number two is, here the Alter Rebbe is going again. And this is something that today is a bit more foreign to us. But there's some people that are embarrassed to do the tnuas. For example, the Nachman Breslev says if a person is having machshavas zoros, he should clap. Yeah, Can't push it away the machshavas zaris. I think he's the first one to bring it, but a lot of people follow that today, right? We don't b'shita, which we explained in the other shurim. But therefore, some people are pushing embarrassed, so they're going to get machshavas zaris. They're not going to be able to do the physical actions of getting it away. Now, because some people are lazy and some people are shy, so those people that do daven b'kavanah, whether they're young, whether they're old, technically it ends up being that they are there aren't so many of them, there aren't so many people. Not because everybody shouldn't, but because most people work, so they can't. And even from those that do have the time for it, either they're lazy and they prefer to learn, or they're lazy to feel, lazy to work on their feelings, or they're embarrassed, they're shy. And because they're so few, therefore they're called Chassidim. In Russia, in White Russia, and in Poland, and in Lithuania, where they're called Chassidim, and it's called Chassidim Arishonim. We know why we're called Chassidim in the Alter Rebbes, because the way you have Chassidim in the Mishnah is the Chassidim Arishonim shri mispalim b'kavanah kana hagam ki shel achshav einam Chassidim gedolim karishonim. Obviously, it's a borrowed. The Alter Rebbes says it's not Chassidim like they were in those days, like we're referring to. But the reason why we're called Chassidim is because the one place you have for the daveners, the one place you have in the Gemara, but in the Mishnah, about the daveners, they're called Chassidim. Now, the point is, the Alter Rebbe continues over here talking about the sinner. Okay, the Alter Rebbe continues over here to talk about what this caused, that the Anshe Vilna, the Alter Rebbe is explaining to the thing what the Rabbi Vilna Levada have an agron b'chareim kilnam shem acher. So that's called Chassidim. I'm hesitant because of the time, and we could go read over here, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to, because our Rebbe is going through and answering a lot of different things. In Vilna, they call the Chassidim the Kaliner, because Kalin is quite close to there. Kalin, and that was what they were known as. They didn't call them Chassidim. And if you see in all the letters back and forth between the investigator and the governor and the Tsar, they're known as a group known as the Kaliner. So Alter Rebbe explains first of all called Chassidim. Alter Rebbe explains number one. Number two is, in Vilna we're called Kaliner, not Chassidim. Why? Because of jealousy. So lazy. And it's not for them to say, for people to say they're lazy and avodas Hashem. Especially because they were ultimately, their Rav did daven for many hours a day, but they were under their kivayachol, continued the legacy of the Vilna Gaon. And if they can't say that the legacy of the Vilna Gaon, but we don't want to daven, but we're lazy. You can't call them lazy. They don't want to be lazy, the lazy followers of the Vilna Gaon. And therefore, they've made as if the natural way of doing things, which is the davening, is shkorim. And like everybody knows that it's not okay. Now, what we've come across is like this. So far, the Alter Rebbe has explained a very simple thing. Here's the cause of the Misnagdim. Okay, Chassidus has put things back the way it always was, which is that everything's about avodas Hashem, serving the Eibishter, serving the Eibishter, serving the Eibishter in Kop. You have serving the Eibishter in hearts. You have serving the Eibishter with Seichel. When you learn Torah, like the Alter Rebbe says, is Nasa. That becomes a kesher. Yeah. That it becomes such a kesher that the she'ein yichud kamoy, such a yichud becomes such a connection to the Eibishter. She'ein yichud kamoy v'lo ke'erker nimsa klal. Such a deep connection to the Eibishter that there's no connection like this. Like ke'erker nimsa klal. This is the highest type of connection you can have to the Eibishter. But when you learn Gemara, when you learn Torah, but with that, there's one thing which is learning, and there's other thing which is davening, and you need both. As Alter Rebbe says, you need both. Davening, everybody davens. Learning, less people are able to learn to the extent that everybody davens, right? So some people learn much more, and so when you have somebody who, if he has to choose, he's a Rav that's corrupted, he's bribed his way into becoming a Rav, and he has to choose between davening and learning. There was never this choice. There was never this option. They had to choose between davening and learning. Then they choose, so they obviously the davening is not for them. They're not interested in davening, so they learn. But in order not to feel bad that they're davening worse than the posh of the people, so they make it as if the davening is not important. They corrupt people to act that way, not to think that way, and therefore they allow the laziness of the people that want to be lazy. Once you're allowed to be lazy, once you give them permission, once there's a shitta in laziness, So if you're lazy, you're going to keep the shit in laziness. So we see over here, Klar, what's the Alter Rebbe explaining to the guy? What's the Alter Rebbe explaining over here? That Chassidus is about Avodas Hashem. And davening is a large part of that Avodas Hashem. Davening is central. Davening and learning. Learning, nobody's denying that learning is part of it. Nobody's denying that learning is thing. There are those that try to tell that the davening is not, and here you see the davening is. It continues and continues and continues. And the Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow, we don't have much time between now and Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow, we're going to continue. We'll continue this tomorrow, and we'll continue to go through it. But this letter is printed in the English of the Alter Rebbe. If you're not able to, if you want to look it up again, you can continue. And I wanted to do the letter of Rebbe Chayes Avshein Onitolon from the Alter Rebbe, but I'm not going to be able to. And from the Rebbe Shabbat, I just don't know when we're going to do it, unless we do it Matzah Shabbos, Rebbe Chof. We'll see. Okay.